Today we're going to be jumping back into our series, Dispatch, and we're going to be looking at Acts chapter 2 and 23. I know last week we took a little bit of a break as we had Kurt Holtis here. 2 weeks ago, Micah McDonald, he had preached Acts 20 and 21, but now I'm back. It's nice to be able to be back preaching after 2 weeks off of the preaching. And the thing that I want to hit on this morning from Acts 22 and 23 is something that I know I've talked about a little bit before, but I think it's something that we need to continue to look at, continue to think about, because it's something that is very real for all of us. How many of you in this room have ever been misunderstood before? Okay. I know I've been misunderstood before. And here's the thing, is a lot of times when we are misunderstood, the very first thing that we do is we jump quickly to being defensive. Because we want people to understand, no, that's not what I meant. Some of us may have had the experience before where we're talking to somebody about a situation involving a person, and then at the end of that conversation, nothing bad was ever said about that person, but they enter the conversation at the end, and all they hear is just a small little part. And they don't have the proper context. And when you don't have the proper context, it's easy to be hurt and offended when you don't understand the bigger picture of what's really going on. There's a lot of reasons why we could be misunderstood. It could just be a poor choice of words on our part, that a lot of times we mean very, very well, and we start opening our mouth before we should, and words come out, and you know as soon as you're saying it, like, I am really hurting that person right now. And then you start trying to backpedal, and you put your foot in your mouth, and you realize, there's nothing I can do in this moment to make this any better. And then there's things where you misunderstand simply because you just don't have the knowledge or the understanding yet. For example, I found this list of people who tweeted things that they didn't understand, and all of a sudden when they came to the realization, and it's a little bit funny, so I'll just read a couple of these. I thought cottage cheese was just regular cheese, but made in small houses in the country. The next one, I used to think seahorses were mythical creatures like unicorns or Pegasi. I was well in my 20s before I saw one in an aquarium and discovered the truth. This one's a pretty good one. I thought that a dishwasher worked by just filling itself with a giant cube of very hot water. And by kid, I mean I learned this was not true 2 years ago when my roommate opened it mid-wash, despite my scream not to. Because of TV, I thought the world used to be black and white. I was very concerned about the youth in Asia. Let me say it one more time, some of you may have caught it. I was very concerned about the youth in Asia. All right. Number 6, I thought guerrilla warfare was some kind of Planet of the Apes fighting. I'm not going to lie, that sounds kind of awesome. And this one's probably my favorite. When I was 4, my dad told me that my grandpa was firing someone at the office today. And I sat there, very quietly thinking, he was burning a dude. You see, we can look at a list like that, and probably all of us have a similar story where we heard a common phrase, and as we heard that common phrase, we totally misinterpreted it, we took it a different way, and when in reality, it was something completely different. We misunderstood someone, or somebody misunderstood what we were saying. And I think a lot of us, we could add things to this list, especially when you think of the dishwasher one, that I'm assuming that the person was probably at least 18, 19, if not in their 20s, when all of a sudden they realize a giant, essentially, ice cube of hot water doesn't fill the dishwasher. You get this eureka moment where everything all of a sudden makes sense, and it's those silly things. There's sometimes where you hear something and you're like, oh, I understand that now. That makes so much more sense. And then there's some things that are just silly and ridiculous that you believed your entire life until all of a sudden you hear it and you're like, oh, that's what that really is. And then you don't really want to admit it, but it's almost too funny to not admit. 2 weeks ago, Micah, he had 6 different points in his message, and if you were here that particular morning, you realize that he only preached the first one. That I think it was a very God-inspired message, that he just got to that first point, he could never get off of that first point, and he was just talking about love. Because realistically, I think when we look at the church, one of the things that gets misunderstood about the church the most is love. Because we can look at it and say, well, the Bible says you should do this, and the Bible says you should do that. And love, all of a sudden, kind of feels like this list of do's and don'ts and rights and wrongs. When in reality, we discipline those that we love. I mean, think about it for a moment. If you're walking through the mall, you're walking or sitting in a restaurant, and there's kids that are misbehaving, you don't typically just walk up to a child that's not yours and tell them that they're wrong and this is how you should behave, because they're not your child. They're not your responsibility. You might correct them because you're feeling frustrated or they're annoying you, but you don't really discipline them. And if you were to walk up to a child and you were to spank them and they're not your child, that will not end well for you. But because it's your child and you love your child, you discipline them because you want them to grow. You want them to leave childish things behind. You want them to move in a way that would draw them closer to God. That's the goal of discipline, and God loves us, so here's the rights and wrongs. Here's what's good for you. Here's what's bad for you. And He wants to move you in a direction. But as a church, and I'll say like Big C church, like all Christians, a lot of times we can take this love, this list of rights and wrongs, and wave the finger and say, you're wrong, you're messing up, you're making a mistake. One of the things I like about Quinn right now, as she's watching nursery rhymes, is that the song that the 5 little monkeys jumping out of the bed. If you watch her when she sings this song, she's wagging her finger when the doctor says no more jumping on the bed. She picks up whatever is nearby her and puts it up to her phone or to her ear and acts like a phone, like she's talking to the mama, no more jumping on the bed. She can already begin understanding right and wrong and discipline of this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do. And she's not even 2 yet. She's starting to understand that process. Yeah, yes, when a baby's an infant, you don't say, why won't you stop crying? Because that's the way they communicate. But as a baby starts to grow, you have to start telling them, you need to use your words. They may be limited. Those of you in here, you may not understand if Quinn and Lydia come up to you and they start talking. You may not understand what they're saying. I understand what they're saying. Annie knows what they're saying because they may not be able to get all of their consonants or vowels right, but we hear the same thing enough. We know what they're saying. And we love them enough to help move them from here to there. And as Christians, we can lose sight of this sometimes when we look at people like, you're messing up. You should do this differently. Well, they don't even know right and wrong. They don't know what the Bible says. And we act like they should have everything in the Bible learned and memorized and put together. And so being misunderstood sometimes within being a Christian isn't a bad thing. Sometimes being misunderstood puts us in the path where God wants us to go, and that's where we're going to be talking about in a little bit. Because Micah wasn't able to make it all the way through because he camped out on that point, I just want to start today in Acts 21, verses 27 through 36, just so I can give proper context. The 7 days of cleansing were almost over. Some Jews from Asia Minor saw Paul at the temple. They stirred up the whole crowd and grabbed Paul. Fellow Israelites, help us, they shouted. This is the man who teaches everyone in all places against our people. He speaks against our law and against this holy place. Besides, he has brought Greeks into the temple. He has made this holy place unclean. They said this because they had seen Trophimus, the Ephesian, in the city with Paul. They thought Paul had brought him into the temple. The whole city was stirred up. People came running from all directions. They grabbed Paul and dragged him out of the temple. Right away, the temple gates were shut. The people were trying to kill Paul. But news reached the commander of the Roman troops. He heard that the people were making trouble in the whole city of Jerusalem. Right away, he took some officers and soldiers with him. They ran down to the crowd. The people causing the trouble saw the commander and his soldiers, so they stopped beating Paul. The commander came up and arrested Paul. He ordered him to be held with 2 chains. Then he asked who Paul was and what he had done. Some of the crowd shouted one thing, some another, but the commander couldn't get the facts because of all the noise. So he ordered that Paul be taken into the fort. Paul reached the steps, but then the mob became so wild that he had to be carried by the soldiers. The crowd that followed kept shouting, "Get rid of him." At this moment, as we move into chapter 22, Paul asked for permission to speak to the crowd. And one of the things that he does is he doesn't speak in maybe even his preferred language, he speaks in Aramaic. Now, if I were to be up here right now and I were to be speaking in Spanish, how many of you in here would understand what I was saying if I was speaking in Spanish? A few hands. If I were to be speaking in fluent German, anyone? Mandarin? I mean, I could start naming the different languages. But in English, I'm making an assumption here. Can everybody understand English? Otherwise, I need a translator in here. But here's the thing. He speaks to them in their heart language. Now, imagine if you all could speak Spanish, and you were fluent in Spanish, but English was your main language. It's what missionaries view and call a heart language. It's what their culture speaks. It's who they are. It's what they were raised speaking. So even if they learned a second language, this one's home. This one is the one they're passionate about, the one they care about. And so Paul starts speaking in Aramaic, because he wants them to hear in their native tongue everything he's saying. So he starts giving his testimony. He starts sharing things, and here's the reason why. When you share in someone's main language, the language that they speak, the language of their people, they start caring about it more because they care that you care. Now, I've been on mission trips before where, going to Poland, I speak very little Polish. I think the entire time I was there, I learned to say hello, which I've since forgot. I worked for about 5 minutes to be able to place an order for a hot chocolate in a cafe and be able to say everything in Polish. And I was standing there the entire time in line, like saying the order over and over and over again in my head because I wanted to be able to do it. But then when we were working with this international church that was launching, there were Polish people who wanted to practice their English with us. And one individual, we were holding a full conversation in English. They forgot one word and they wanted to stop speaking English. And I look at it as, here's somebody who cared so much about being able to speak and communicate with me directly that they would give that much effort and that much trying because they wanted to speak in my language. And I'm thinking of it, I can hardly even order a hot chocolate in your language, and you're shutting down because you can't think of one word. And I remember it making me feel so sad in that moment of, here's somebody who's really, really trying to communicate with me, but because they couldn't think of one word, they went back to the translator. And Paul here wants to communicate with them so strongly that he is speaking in their language. As he's speaking in Acts chapter 22, verses 17 through 21, though, he says this. After giving his history, giving his testimony, in verse 17 he says, I returned to Jerusalem and was praying at the temple. Then it seemed to me that I was dreaming. I saw the Lord speaking to me. Quick, he said, leave Jerusalem at once. The people here will not accept what you tell them about me. Lord, I replied, these people know what I used to do. I went from one synagogue to another and put believers in prison. I also beat them. Stephen was a man who told others about you. I stood there when he was killed. I had agreed that he should die. I even guarded the coats of those who were killing him. Then the Lord said to me, go, I will send you far away to people who are not Jews. That right there makes the people furious. Because here's a well-educated man who has a significant chunk, at least the first 5 books of the Old Testament, memorized. Has a greater knowledge and understanding of Scripture than potentially a lot of us in this room combined. And he had done all this to persecute the Christians, and all of a sudden the Jews, they don't get it, they don't understand it. And Paul's up here saying, yeah, I talked to God, and God said, forget about them, go to the other people, because they're not going to listen to you anyways. That doesn't go over well with the Jews. They're missing out on something, though. They're misunderstanding Paul. Paul's not dismissing them. What Paul is doing is saying that God is sending me to somebody else who's ready and willing and able to listen and to hear what I have to say to them. Because with Jesus dying on the cross, Jesus did not just die for the Jews, he died for all people. He died to erase all sin, for any who would believe in him, for any who would place their trust in him. And so often, it's so easy to look at something and say, well, God died for everybody who loves him. No, God died for everybody who loves him and for everybody who doesn't love him. That if you were the only person who needed saving, God would have come for you. But think of the person that drives you the craziest, the person that you think is so far from God that they could never, ever accept God. God died for them too. I said that on Wednesday night during our prayer time here. that there is never a single person that you will ever look them in the eyes that God didn't die for. When you operate with that kind of a mindset, when you realize that no matter who you're looking at, no matter what you're facing, that person is created in the image of God, that God loves them, and God wants to see them redeemed, and God wants to see them spend eternity in heaven. It changes the way you talk with people. It changes how you do things. You no longer care about being understood. You care about the gospel going further. You care about the gospel message getting to one more person, to the next person. Because guess what? If we're living in a spot where we say, I don't want to be misunderstood, it's frustrating when I'm misunderstood, I want to defend myself when I'm misunderstood. Jesus was misunderstood and died on a cross. And if he hadn't been misunderstood, where would we be today? That's a thought that we have to kind of chew over, because all of a sudden somebody might misunderstand you. And as long as they're misunderstanding you because you're following the gospel, now if you're gossiping about somebody, and then all of a sudden they misunderstand you, but it's actually you talking bad about someone, well, that's not scriptural. That's not what God has called us to do. In that case, that's on you. But if you're following after God, if you're doing what God has called you to do, going where God has called you to go, and you get misunderstood, it could just be because God's setting you up for what's next. And we need to trust and put faith in the fact that God has got our back. We don't need to feel like I've got to defend myself all the time. I'm going to get into that even a little bit more next week. But the fact that God has your back, God is your defender. You do not need to defend yourself. God doesn't intend for us to be on the defensive. God intends for us to do what he tells us to do and consistently be on the offensive, going after those who are lost. Other people in this world are not your enemies. They may be thrown off by the lies of the enemy, but other people in your workplace are not your enemies. If you feel like they're your enemies, begin praying for them. If you pray for people, it's very hard to get mad at them. It's very hard to talk bad about them because we are putting other people first, just like God put us first. If we're truly operating under the love that God has called us to live under, then we know what we're supposed to do. It's love one another. Even if we feel like they're not worthy of having love, we still need to love them. Acts 22, 24 through 28 goes on and says this. So the commanding officer ordered that Paul be taken into the fort. He gave orders for Paul to be whipped and questioned. He wanted to find out why the people were shouting at him like this. I love that right there. He gave orders for him to be whipped and questioned, and then he wanted to find out why the people. Think about that. Sometimes you're going through something where it feels like everybody is persecuting you, and you don't know why, and they don't know why. Sometimes life happens, but we stay faithful to what God has called us to do. We don't change midstream. Paul said to him, does the law allow you to whip a Roman citizen who hasn't even been found guilty? When the commander heard this, he went to the commanding officer and reported it. What are you going to do? The commander asked. This man is a Roman citizen. So the commanding officer went to Paul. Tell me, he asked, are you a Roman citizen? Yes, I am, Paul answered. Then the officer said, I had to pay a lot of money to become a citizen. But I was born a citizen, Paul replied. In that moment, Paul just responds back, I was born a citizen. Paul didn't become a Roman citizen because of something that he did, something that he earned, something that he paid for. He was born a citizen. And I think the direct parallel to this is in the kingdom of God. You don't earn your way into heaven. You don't pay your way into heaven. You don't serve your way into heaven. You're born again into heaven. You see, the Roman officer here is looking at it like, you get a benefit that I had to pay for. Where we as Christians, we can look at it and say, yeah, I may be going through a difficult time, but this is what God has called me to do. This is the kingdom that I'm participating in. I was born again into this. No matter what you bring up against me, I know where I'm going. When we truly adopt that sort of a mentality, that no matter what you do to me, no matter where you put me, no matter how much you take advantage of me, no matter how much I'm misunderstood, I know where I'm going when I die. And it's a place that's better than this. It changes it so and Micah said this 2 weeks ago, it's Paul lives this life of already having died to himself. And you can't kill a dead man. You cannot kill somebody who already is living a life and saying, you know what, it's like I'm already dead. I already know where I'm going. I already know what I'm doing. This is my mission. This is my call. This is where I'm going. And when, as Christians, we operate that way, and we say, it's not about me. It's not about my glory. It's not about me being famous. It's just about Jesus and more people knowing Jesus. Then we'll go where God calls us to go. We'll do what God calls us to do, no matter what the costs are to us, because it's not about us. As we move into chapter 23, Paul looks straight at the Sanhedrin. My brothers, he said, I have always done my duty to God. To this day, I feel that I have done nothing wrong. Ananias the high priest heard this, so he ordered the men standing near Paul to hit him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, you pretender, God will hit you. You sit there and judge me by the law, but you yourself broke the law when you commanded them to hit me. Those who were standing near Paul spoke to him. They said, how dare you talk to God's high priest? Paul replied, brothers, I didn't realize he was the high priest. It is written, do not speak evil about the ruler of your people. Just saying, some of you may need to go back and repent to what you said Wednesday morning when you woke up. Just saying. We need to pray for those that are in leadership over us. Because what if God got a hold of their heart? Think of some of the greatest celebrities that are out there, athletes, politicians. What if God got a hold of their heart? Instead of complaining about people, let's pray that God will send the right person in their path that will change the way they view things, change the way they speak, they act, they talk, the beliefs that they have. And let's not speak evil about the ruler of your people, from Exodus 22:28. Verse 6 goes on, Paul knew that some of them were Sadducees and others were Pharisees. So he called out to the members of the Sanhedrin, my brothers, he said, I am a Pharisee. I come from a family of Pharisees. I believe that people will rise from the dead. That's why I am on trial. When he said this, the Pharisees and the Sadducees started to argue. They began to take sides. The Sadducees say that people will not rise from the dead. They don't believe there are angels or spirits either, but the Pharisees believe all these things. People were causing trouble and making a lot of noise. Some of the teachers of the law who were Pharisees stood up. They argued strongly, we find nothing wrong with this man. They said, what if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him? The people arguing were getting out of control. The commanding officer was afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by them. So he ordered the soldiers to go down and take him away from them by force. The officer had told them to bring Paul into the fort. The next night, the Lord stood near Paul. He said, be brave. You have told people about me in Jerusalem. You must do the same in Rome. Here's the important thing with Paul. Now, there's moments where you can be misunderstood, and it's because God has directly told you to do something, and you got to be okay in that moment. Paul doesn't know who Ananias is in this moment. He doesn't recognize him as the high priest, so he talks back to him. And when he realizes he's wrong, what's the first thing he does? He apologizes for being wrong. Now, he doesn't do one of these apologies that, I'm sorry, but, or I'm sorry that you feel this way. He just apologizes. So often in our apologies, we're putting stipulations and I'm sorry that you feel this way, or I'm sorry that I made you feel this way. No, it's I'm sorry that I did this to you. He owns the misunderstanding. He owns the fact of, I didn't know who you were. I apologize. You're right. I shouldn't have talked to you this way. But he starts realizing that as he's talking with this group of Pharisees and Sadducees, the big difference between the two, and it comes out in the text, is the Sadducees didn't believe that people would be able to rise from the dead. That's their big issue when it comes to Jesus, is that there's no way that Jesus could be who he said he was because people don't come back from the dead. The Pharisees were all about the law and that they could recognize that Jesus could raise from the dead, but he's got to do it this way, and he's got to follow these laws, and if he doesn't do it the way we expect him to do it, then he's wrong. So Paul just brings up the fact that, hey, I'm actually a Pharisee. The Pharisees and the Sadducees began having this argument over it. And here's the beautiful thing that happens. As we look at the end of that passage of Scripture, the Lord stood next to Paul. He said, be brave. You have told people about me in Jerusalem. You must do the same in Rome. Now, on all of Paul's other journeys, it was him just traveling here in these like mission trips. He's planting churches in this city and in that city and all over the place. In this moment, him being misunderstood is leading to something big. Because God wants him to go to Rome. God's taking him to the next step. But he's not doing it the same way. He's not just saying, hey, go hop on a boat and go to Rome and tell them about me. He's allowing Paul to be persecuted so that Paul can make it to Rome, so that Paul can share the gospel. Because something that you notice around the world is the church thrives when it's persecuted. You look at the Chinese church. We had Rob Burkhardt a couple weeks ago, who was a missionary in Northern Asia. And it was one of the things that he shared, that as the church is persecuted, it grows. Because people get serious about their faith or they walk away from it. And then when all of a sudden the people who are serious about their faith start growing and start moving together in one force, amazing things start happening. And I think the American church, one of the reasons why the American church struggles is because we don't want to be persecuted. It's comfortable living the American life and being a Christian in America right now. And the very things that we point out being persecuted, the average American doesn't get thrown in jail because they have a Bible in their house, or multiple Bibles in their house, or Bibles that are just sitting on the bookshelf collecting dust. You see, in a Chinese church, they may have one Bible amongst the entire church, and they tear out pages, and everyone takes a page home with them, and they memorize that page, and they memorize the scripture, because that scripture has life, and then they come and they trade that page with somebody else so that they can get the truth that's on the next page. They take their faith serious. And so as a church, we need to never be worried in persecution, because God comes through in persecution over and over again. And that God is using this persecution for Paul to begin a path that will move him to Rome so that he can be made famous in Rome as well. The thing is, all this, on one hand, it can be very easy to say. It sounds hard to do because we don't want to be persecuted. We want to be able to do things our own way. We don't want to depend on God to have to come through. We want to be able to make sure that our life is secure, that our life is good, that we have enough money in the bank, that we have a nice house that we can live with. When all of a sudden, what's God calling you to do? At the end of the day, that's what matters. What is God calling you to do? Last week with Kurt sharing about the mission trip, is God calling you to go on that mission trip? Yes, there's a cost, but to be able to go into villages where people don't know who Jesus is and give basic medical need, and then to be able to pray with them and introduce Jesus to them, that's something that you're having to give up something that you may care for, comfort for a week, a vacation for a week, money for the trip. But God's calling us to do something. Acts 23 through 24 says this, that as Paul is receiving death threats and they need to get him out, that the commanding officers called for two of the commanders. He ordered them, gather a company of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 men armed with spears. Get them ready to go to Caesarea at 9 o'clock tonight. Provide horses for Paul so that he may be taken safely to Governor Felix. God has a plan, and his plan is to get Paul from the mess that he's in to the place he needs to go so that Paul can begin speaking the truth to a totally different grouping of people and helping the Romans begin to see who God is. But it's a process, and that God, if you see here, for one man to get from where he is to where he needs to start going, there's a company of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 men armed with spears. Imagine that if we need to get somebody from here to the other side of Detroit, and each and every one of us has a spear, and we put that person in the middle of us, we stand a pretty good chance of getting them from one place to the next. But then there's horsemen, and there's 200 other soldiers. When we think of it, how many people did God say, I'm going to send you, and I'm going to go before you, and I'm going to provide safe travel? You may not always feel like it. You may not always be able to see what God's up to and what God's trying to do, but believe it, that if God has called you to it, he is sending 200 horsemen, or 200 soldiers, and 70 horsemen, and 200 men with spheres. He is sending the protection that you need to get you from here to there. We just need to trust that God is going before us. If God has called us to it, God will see us through the situation. We just need to be okay with being misunderstood. We need to be okay that when God calls us to do something, that we're going to follow no matter what. We need to feel like if we're in a time of worship, I know some of you may be very introspective when you worship. And it's not that you don't want to raise a hand in worship, it's because you're sitting there and you're focused on the glory of God. That's okay. For some of you, I want to raise my hands, I want to jump up and down, I want to dance, I want to come down the altar. That's okay. What has God called you to do? And don't focus on everybody else in the room. What has God called you to do? Because so often we get focused on what God has called others to do and say, well, that's not how I would do it. Good thing that's not you then. We're all created unique in the image of God, special and different. We all have a different piece of who God is. And when all of a sudden you unite us all together, we start seeing a broader, better picture of who God is. We are all created in the image of God. Not just me, not just you, all of us. And so every single person, every little bit of the personality, when we start getting rid of the layers of fear and anxiety and worry and stress and all these things that aren't supposed to be us, we get rid of those things, then all of a sudden we're presenting the picture of God. For those of you that are introspective, worship God with all your heart. For those of you that you want to clap, you want to praise, you want to vocalize, worship God with all your heart. It's not about how you worship, it's the fact that we do worship. And people in the room, this is why I want to even make this statement. You may look at them like, wow, they're really loud. That's who God created them to be. And someone that you're loud, that person's not jumping. The song says, I'm free to run, and you're not running. Well, guess what? That's how God made them to be too. That's okay. The thing is, are we worshiping God with all of our heart? And if people misunderstand us, so be it. Are we doing what God has called us to do? If we are, then go ahead and misunderstanding. Because like I said earlier, Christ was misunderstood. If the worship team could come forward. This morning, as we go to close, we're going to do two things. We're going to recognize some members that have been approved to the membership of this church. We're going to pray over them. And then we're going to spend some time just worshiping. Because here's the thing. When it comes to taking steps of faith in the church, the first step is accepting Christ. The next step is publicly being water baptized. To say, I'm following after God. I've made a commitment. I've made a change. It's really easy to say in the back of your head. And a lot of you, as we approach New Year's, will do this. You'll make a New Year's commitment of, I want to be better with money this year. I want to lose 10 pounds. I want to do this or do that. When you don't put it out there of what you're actually trying to do, they're great thoughts. But when you start putting public action to it, there's a reason why I post my long runs when I train for marathons. Because it holds me accountable. If I say, I'm going to run a marathon, and then that's the last time I say it, who's going to ever hold me accountable to it? But if all of a sudden that I start training, John Smith was giving me a hard time this morning. He's like, you posted that you ran 11 miles. You're making me look bad. And here's the thing, is that's not why I do it. I do it because I said that I'm going to do it, and I want to make sure that there's accountability out there. Getting water baptized is that very thing. And pretty soon we'll be advertising the next time we do water baptism. If you've never been water baptized, here's the thing. Just get water baptized. Take the plunge. I mean, pun fully intended there. I don't care if you've been a Christian for 30 years or 30 minutes. That's what we're supposed to do. We're commanded to say, I'm following after God. Now let everybody see it. It's almost like water baptism was the social media back in biblical times. Everybody pay attention. Look at what I'm doing. I'm living for Jesus. There's places in our world, please know this, there's places in our world that when people get water baptized, they're instantly disowned by their family. Because they've left the religion of their family. They've left the way they were raised. Let's be individuals that if God says, I want you to be water baptized, we say, okay, let's get water baptized. then one of those next steps with the church is getting involved in the local church and playing a role. And people may look at you and say, I don't know why you're giving to that church. I don't know why you're spending time at that church. You're not doing the things that you used to do. And you look at it and say, you know what? I'm following after Jesus. You may be misunderstood. But if you're following after God, that's what matters most, because it can open doors and open conversation. And this morning, we're going to recognize members. I'm going to just say all their names and just have you come up and just line up in the front. Barbara Beluski, Josh Buell, Steve Ashton, get off the guitar, and Lily Lambert-Grant. And here's the thing. With these four, they went through a class. We talked about what the church believes, and I'll let you know that we're reworking how we're going to do our church membership with Cheryl Holmes and myself. We're going to do kind of a first steps to help really integrate somebody that's new into the church that's going to be coming in February. So if you're not a member yet, you're going to have an opportunity in the very near future to walk through this class for the very first time. But for these individuals, they have made a decision that they want to play an active role in this church. And if there's any family members, if you want to come around and gather on them, we're going to pray for them in a moment. But here's the reason why, if the three of you can just turn and look at me for a moment. Becoming a member of a local church, there's multiple reasons why we do it. The first, it's a unique privilege. The second, it's an important responsibility. It involves a demonstration of a commitment to Jesus and a commitment to one another. When we look at Paul in Philippians 2:1-4, it says, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourself. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. That's so much of why we are members of a local church, members of a local body, is because we realize that none of us can truly do it alone. That all of us have high moments where everything is good, but we have low moments where we need people to rally around us and come around us and help us through those struggles. That's why we have the local church. We have a responsibility to encourage one another, to build up one another, to help one another. But probably most importantly, it goes to what our vision is as a church, what our mission is as a church, and it's anchoring one another to Jesus. Helping people who don't know Jesus and anchoring them to Jesus Christ. That's what taking the next step as a member is. It's not going to get you into heaven. I'd love to tell you that there was like a special punch card when you got to heaven that you're like, hey, you're a member at the Shores Church. That doesn't exist. But the goal is, when we get to heaven, because of our service, because we love Jesus, we serve. Because we serve, people meet Christ. And as we serve Christ, the scripture tells us that we get jewels in our crown. But here's the beautiful thing with that crown. We lay that crown and we throw it down at the feet of Jesus. I want to have a crown that is so filled with jewels that I have something amazing that I can offer. And I really do believe that being a part and being a member of the church is not just having a vote if this happens or that happens. It's about saying, I'm committed to this church and to this community so that this community meets Jesus in a whole other way. This morning, if you're a friend or a family member, I just would like you to gather around those up here. We're just going to pray over them this morning as they officially join the membership at the Shores Church. Heavenly Father, Lord, I just thank you so much this morning for these four that are saying that they want to be a part of this church on a whole other level. But they're looking for opportunities to serve, to belong, to be a part, to help this church reach this community, to help anchor people to Jesus Christ, people that are lost, people that feel like they have no hope, or that they want and have a passion to do that, or that they may be misunderstood by others, but Lord, that their intentions are pure, that they want to see your kingdom come. They want to see you be made famous in this place. Lord, I pray over all four of them. Lord, that you would just continue to go before them. Lord, that you would clearly call them to what their mission is, what their goal is, what their role is, God. Lord, we just thank you for their lives. In Jesus' name, amen. Now this morning, if you just stand, we're going to worship together before we close. So if you're welcome to come down to the altar space, you're welcome to stay where you are. We're just going to worship. Worship the way that God has called